Well, President Biden is in negotiations as we speak right now on two new massive stimulus plans focused on infrastructure, the environment, the entire kitchen sink, I guess. And this week, we received worse than expected inflation news. I guess we on this show were expecting it, but I think the mainstream media was shocked by it. So, what's happening with the U.S. dollar as investors take shelter in gold and cryptocurrencies? And when will we see this next economic collapse that we've been thinking about for the past year? Joining me now to discuss that and so much more is Dr. Ron Paul, former congressman, host of the Liberty Report. And he does a great job of trying to navigate all of these crazy waters. And it's been a few years since we had a chance to speak. But Dr. Paul, welcome to Morning Invest. Great to see you again.
Clayton, nice to be with you today.
Well, we got a lot to cover, and I want to get you out of here on time. So I want to start with, I guess, maybe news of the week. There's a couple of big news stories this week. Number one is inflation. We saw these worse than expected inflation numbers. And I guess everyone wants to know right now, are we headed in the right direction, the wrong direction? You were the one who accurately predicted the collapse before. Are you seeing similar signs now?
Oh, yes, but I don't think we're anticipating and looking for the date when it's going to start. I think we're already there. And each correction comes differently. Some come in one day and they crash. But the other day, we saw a big change when you looked at the CPI and the PPI. No, we're in the correction. But, I think the problem of inflation is broader than most people think. Because when inflation occurs, it distorts things, and some people think they're richer than others, and then there has to be an adjustment, and people become poorer. So we're already suffering from it. People still don't have enough money. We have to keep printing and passing it out. There's shortage of money because the dollar is going down in value. The purchasing power is way down. So that's been going on. And the only thing that they've offered so far is just spend more money and get political credit for this, and then also print the money. And yet the inflation is here. Most people think, well, the only sign of inflation so far, and it's transitory, is the CPI went up. And I always thought the most bizarre thing on inflation in the world was this national policy for years now, the Fed begging and pleading, and the businessman and the banker, when are we going to get 2% inflation? When will the Fed steal 2% of our value on purpose? Of course, some people have suffered a lot more. And you ask about when will this turn down and we face our problem. I think anybody who wants to live in a big city or check this out, they need to go to. I always used New York and Detroit and Chicago and San Francisco. But somebody told me you better add Austin in there too, because there are street people in Austin. Yeah. And that's the wicked thing about inflation. Some people get richer, some people get poorer. It's just a messy system. It's the most immoral economic event you can have. And that is what motivated me to get into politics way back in the 70s, because I was just getting introduced to Austrian economics. And it was predicted by others that the Bretton Woods would break down and usher in a bad decade. Well, it's ushered in many, many bad decades, and this country is a lot poorer than anybody realizes.
We see these tent cities setting up in Los Angeles. You mentioned Austin, right down the street from the Federal Reserve. I mean, talk about an ironic, moment there when the Federal Reserve chief has to drive to work past tents, as he's been able to dole out trillions of dollars to Wall Street, and millions of people are out of work, and wages at the low end are not coming up. They're having to try to beg people to come back to work right now. It's a disaster. Do you see any of the infrastructure policies and in legislation from President Biden as a way of trying to eradicate poverty, or are we simply kicking the can down the street?
It's not going to get rid of poverty, because they're not addressing the real source of the problem, and that is big government excesses, and debt is a big issue. It's the dependency of the people on government. Politically speaking, you just can't do what you have to do, and that is cut. But no, it's locked in place. So we can expect everything that we've already mentioned is going to get much, much worse. It's not a shortage of money. Everybody thinks, well, and that's why the government's sending out all these checks. And all that did was more more distortion. This was, to me, the sort of interesting but very serious problem is they sent so much money out there, they disincentivized everybody to go to work. It used to be that times were tough. Just give me a job, any job, I'll do it. And that's what was going on in the Depression. They couldn't do it. But now it's better just to stay at home. And all of a sudden, businesses that are just coming out of the insanities of COVID lockdown say, well, I want to open up. I need a restaurant, do this. They can't get anybody to do it. And it's just compounding the stupidities of it, not allowing people to make their own decisions. And it's based on malinvestment, bad judgment, and government is way too involved. And as a libertarian, I happen to believe that we should have freedom of choice. It's just about everything that we do. The one thing we can't do is hurt people. And that's all the government seems to be doing, is hurting people.
What about big businesses hurting people? I mean, this is something we talk about on our show all the time. We've seen these low wages, these low wage jobs. We saw just today 9,000 cases of COVID, over 1/3 of cases at these Tyson chicken plants, accounted for an enormous number of COVID cases in these particular areas in Arkansas. What responsibility do these big businesses have to take care of these employees? If government doesn't intervene in this, where do you come down on that? Will they run all over people, or will they actually want to help people?
Yeah, most of the time, most of the things that we're talking about there is done because of the exemption, from lawsuits. If you look at the social medias, you can't sue them. And now, if you're in the business of making money by forcing people to take vaccines and working on a vaccine that will have your passport in, they can't be sued either. And so the governments get protection, but that's not freedom. That's abuse of government. And but the big business people are, they're top-notch lobbyists, and they're the ones who benefit from the inflation. So it's not a surprise that you have street people and very wealthy people in Washington, D.C., you can go over to where the lobbyists live, especially the lobbyists in the medical profession or the lobbyists for the military-industrial complex. And they are doing very well.
I want to talk about, you mentioned the 70s when you really got into politics. Of course, we saw the elimination of the gold standard at the time. There's much talk. I've had Michael Saylor on the show to talk about this idea of the Bitcoin standard. And we saw, obviously, some volatility this week with inflation, the U.S. dollar losing its value, and people moving into gold, into precious metals. Gold has popped up a little bit over the past few days. And, of course, many billionaires, millionaires see Bitcoin right now as the ultimate store of value. In fact, we even heard Fed Chief Jerome Powell say that he thinks it rivals gold as a store of value. Where do you come down on cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, though, as property and as a store of value for the future of our monetary policy in the United States?
Well, I don't go out of my way to make predictions, but I have made some, on bubbles and when they will burst and this sort of thing. But I would say that I personally expect gold to be around a lot longer than cryptocurrencies. I just don't think I don't think they're money. But I have a very strong. I talk at the cryptocurrency meetings a lot, and most of them have the worldview that I have. The world is messed up. The economy is messed up. We have too many wars, and we have too big a government. The deficits are wrong, and there's going to be chaos, and we ought to protect ourselves. And that's what I believe. I think it's a mess, and I believe that cryptocurrencies ought to be legal, and there should be no prohibitions against using cryptocurrencies, and let the market sort it out. I don't think the market has sorted this out. Right now there's a lot of questions raised. Crypto was up to 64,000, now it's down to 58,000. So that's not a big deal. I would think if I bought it 58,000 or bought it at 60,000, I'd be wondering what's going on. But it just historically does not qualify as money. But if it does protect people, as long as the people that are involved, and this is a big if really, as long as the people involved do not commit fraud, they can do what they want with it. But that's our biggest problem with our fiat money. It's fraudulent,
Right.
So,
Yeah, I hear that argument all the time. It's like, well, what is the U.S. dollar, or what is Bitcoin even based on? And I often say to people on my show, I say, well, what is the dollar based on? What does it stand for anymore? If we can just print it, when you have when you have Bitcoin, when you can actually, finite how many Bitcoin are in production and what we have. Wouldn't the U.S. government be better off moving to a blockchain so we know precisely how much currency is in circulation?
You to have the freedom to do that, but that gets a little confusing for me because I was drafted in the '60s. Vietnam was going on, and I thought about the people as they were struggling to get out of Vietnam, and I read stories where the people who got out usually had a gold coin in their pocket, and I keep thinking, well, I don't know all this. I should know about cryptocurrencies, and I'm not really good with a computer. So I thought, am I going to carry the computer? What happens if the electricity goes off? How am I going to do all this? But I want the freedom to do this, and there's a big difference between Mises. Talks about the origination of money, all sound money, and money that works. It originates in the marketplace. People want to see something. If it's a pack of cigarettes or something, or tobacco, or whatever, there's always a substitute that they can see. And our dollar, although it is now, it originated as silver. That was the silver standard, and gold, of course. There, the Constitution says only gold and silver can be legal tender. I argue that the Libertarian Society can solve this problem and make the decision, and I don't think anybody knows exactly where the cryptos are going. To think that I'm going to sell my house and buy crypto because it's going to $1 million. It may, because it's a lot higher than I thought it was, a couple months ago. But what I'm involved in is arguing the case for liberty, solving the problem, and that only works if you have a moral society. And our founders understood this. They gave us the Constitution, but they said it won't be worth anything if you don't have a moral standard, and that people have to, live under those conditions. And that's the biggest job. And right now, we are less moral than the country was at one time. And it's less family oriented, and there's too much corruption in government. And matter of fact, you might say governments are corrupt by nature. So this is what I think is important. People say, well, what are you going to do for your survival? Well, I'm going to do exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm going to have as much safety and security and investments as I can. But nothing is safe, and that's why I put most of my energy into talking about why you need to work for freedom and curtail your government. That's where the real threat is. It isn't coming from the fact that somebody's going to invade us or the coronavirus. It's the fact that the government is undermined. Coronavirus, I don't happen to believe it was anything compared to what they made it out to believe. And yet look at what they've done to us by scaring everybody to death and butchering our kids. It makes me sick to watch these kids in grade school, 8, 9, 10 years old, all wearing masks, which I think are very, very dangerous to do. So that we don't want that type of government. That's why I want people to say, well, how do you solve these problems, and try to explain the best I can how that can work out. You should be able to understand property rights. The understanding of property rights were fully understood more than 300 years before the Ten Commandments were written. They knew that private property was a significant event, and that's what we need to deal with. But now, especially in this age of this wokeism and all this stuff going on, property is supposed to be owned by the people, not the individual. They're going to be owned by the government, and you will have elite people telling us what to do, and they'll tell us where we can go, and that's why they want those passports jammed into our bodies.
Well, and that's why I think Bitcoin specifically, I'm not talking about Ethereum, these other cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin as property. We see what happened in Venezuela. We're seeing what's happening in other countries right now in Central America and South America, where they are moving towards Bitcoin to get away from their country's currency as a way to protect themselves, to get out of poverty, to actually have something to as you mentioned, having a coin in your pocket to get out of
Right.
Vietnam. And I think, having that particular digital wallet tied directly to that person, as Michael Saylor says, you can stab me, you can shoot me, you'll never be able to access it. It's mine. It's tied to me. And I think that's incredibly powerful and uplifting, and it gives people the freedom, I think, of that movement that you're talking about. And so where do you see gold? I mean,
Yeah.
we talk. Go ahead.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and that's why what I want, they're legal. And you just described why. Well, they'll never be able to curtail the transmission of the Bitcoin. That's where my experience with just looking at history and looking at Congress and looking at Washington and looking at gold. Look at what they did in 1933. The first thing they did was turn in your gold. You said, well,
Right.
you can't turn in crypto. I'll tell you, I think the government is so powerful. And I read the stories, even though I don't understand how they figure it out. But I've read stories where people were, and talked to people who, at the exchanges, they found out that they made some profits and they were called to tax by the IRS. Some of the conferences I went to, they say, "Oh yes, we should be regulated by the SEC. That'll give us, it'll make us look credible and authentic." I said, "Well, you can do that. Yeah, you're lobbying for that. I don't
Right.
lobby for that kind of stuff because the government is the problem, whether it's a gold standard or a paper standard." And your argument would be a very valuable argument, and that's why I would argue that I'm in favor of exactly what you want, and that is that you can use crypto and make whatever you can, keep it from the government being able to come in and it's just that I have a ways to go before all of a sudden I am going to become confident that my government is going to take care of me and protect my liberty. The clowns I worked with in Washington, they're not going to take care of you or me. They're going
No
to
way.
support they're going to support the people who want power. It's ideological battle that we're fighting right now is where all the action should be, because if you don't change those attitudes, crypto won't save us, gold won't save us. It just won't work. And this government we have won't save us either. And we don't have the worst government, but we used to have one of the best. But right now, it's the world that's suffering, from the willingness of the people to go along with authoritarianism as our managers of our lives.
Don't you see, though, some similarities between yourself and, say, Senator Bernie Sanders, who held a hearing yesterday calling for oversight and reduction? As I don't know how much he's actually going to be able to accomplish here, but ending this military-industrial complex, $740 billion a year that's going to this war machine, this endless war machine. Do you see some maybe common ground there with someone like Bernie Sanders on that issue?
A little bit, and if you go back and check the record, he and I introduced bills together, and some of them were just on economic issues, and some dealt with this. But there were some appropriation bills that, if the products were being made in Vermont, he might leak a little bit on his principles. So some of these weapons are built. The B-1 bomber is one of the worst boondoggles ever. But a little bit of that bomber is built in every state. So nobody votes against it, even though it's I think, an ancient weapon. Now you can sit at a desk and launch a missile and hit any spot in the world. And yet we're still spending that money. No, Dennis Kucinich was one that I worked with, and he had that attitude too. Independent-minded person, and would vote against all the military. Matter of fact, and then they were both Democrats, but Dennis was more consistent in his votes. And if you go back and look, you'll find out that Dennis and I might be the only two people voting against something. We certainly worked real hard in trying to prevent the insanities of what was going on in the Middle East. But I don't think the political system is the place where we're going to find the solutions. I think it has to be an intellectual, principled fight on the philosophy. And the mess we in Washington is very, very bipartisan. All the money being spent, do you think it was all Trump's fault or all Biden's fault? Right now we have inflation. Biden didn't have enough time to cause the inflation, other than the fact that he was 40 years in the Senate and endorsed all that stuff. But it's very bipartisan. They will suspend even a very, very important hearing to impeach the president in order for everybody to get back and vote for the military appropriation bill. And that's why I gained my cynicism from just witnessing all that. And the political system is a reflection of the people. So I'm trying to change the people's attitude. And the place where I've had the most encouragement and interest shown was happened to be in the university, talking to young people. And you say, oh, no, they're a lost cause. I don't believe that at all. They just have to hear about it and present the case for it. I am pleased to say that my most successful speech that I ever gave, the largest turnout ever, was at Berkeley, California.
Wow.
People feel, you're crazy. No, you're crazy. No, it was unbelievable. But I talked very frankly about owning your life, and you're responsible. You do anything you want, and you can spend your money any way you want, but you can't hurt people, and you have to have a moral standard. And these young people, of course, it was a picked audience, this big university, so only the good guys came. They're open to that. Even now, you don't need to think that you have to get 50-60% of the people to agree with these views. You just have to get a lot of people, or a significant number. They say there were about 7 or 8% of the people that actually endorsed our revolution and thinking that we should throw off the chains of the British Empire.
Wow, an amazing audience there. I'm sure I would love to have heard that speech. Well, Dr. Paul, it's been a real pleasure having you here on the show. I'd hope, and hey, when you get your first Bitcoin, you call us. I want you to come back on the show, and when we see what happens over the next 7, 8, 10 months with the government printing money like it's going out of style, I would love to have you back here on the show to talk more about where we are in this economy. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, very good, Clay. Nice to be with you today.
Thank you.